TJ's scholarly focus for the past 24 years has been ancient Celtic and European archaeology through the lens of gender studies. And he also has experienced classroom, lab, and field in Neolithic, European, prehistoric North American, and historic American archaeology. His cultural resource management work with firms like the Louis Berger Group has taken him on excavations all over the East Coast, and all these enhance his ability to be an effective and memorable educator. Though TJ has also been writing fiction for years, his first published novel, Controlling Interest, debuted on Amazon and Kindle in October of 2019. And TJ wants you to feel free to reach out to him and contact him even after this event. I think you guys are in for a treat. He has written 3 books, and he has them on the table for you guys to come talk to him about them. And without further ado, I'm going to have TJ come up. And if you haven't already filled out your questions as he's talking, fill them out, raise your hand, I'll pop around and collect them so that when he's done, he can begin answering them so that nobody's question gets overlooked. Okay? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me here today. I have to say I'm honored to be presenting at this institution. I love what AAUW does. I couldn't have picked a better group to speak to today. And I'm obviously going to end on my presentation by talking about the influence of the women in my life and how they've contributed to my writing today. So just again, thank you to Julia, to Sonora, to Tony, to every one of you that's part of this wonderful organization. And one of the things that delighted me most about being up here today was to hear where the money was going to youth, female youth in the Danbury community. Some of the students I serve in this community I know can definitely use what we're bringing to the table here. So thank you again just for having me here. And I can thank you again, Sonora, for that wonderful introduction. I feel like if there's a theme to what I want to talk about today, it's my experiences. And I've had lots of them, and weaving that into writing is both an easy thing and a difficult thing at the same time. Because you're writing fiction. I haven't lived all the lives of all the characters I've written, but I do like to add the reality of my experiences to these plots and narratives that I'm creating. So I really want to talk today about how these experiences have shaped my craft, and I have a little bit of slide presentation to show you a little bit about that. Don't worry, I am a high school teacher, but I'm not requiring anybody to take notes on this, so don't worry. And I'm not going to yell at anybody about being on their cell phone, so don't worry about that. So again, thank you very much for attending today. I'm really lucky. I have to say I'm an exceptionally lucky human being to have had so many different diverse experiences throughout my life. Some of these have been through jobs, some of these have been through travel experiences, cultural experiences, religious experiences. And I try to weave these into the tapestry of the fiction that I'm trying to create. So if you would mind, if you can take a look, you can see it ranges from everything from ice cream truck to hanging out with exotic animals and doing conservation at the Beardsley Zoo. As Sonora mentioned, I spent some time in New York City working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And of course, as you're going to see later, I've done some archaeology work, which is factored in especially into one of my novel's foundations. So, I mean, I'm really lucky, but I didn't start writing as a primary way of trying to be creative. I was interested in filmmaking for the longest time. I grew up writing screenplays and writing scripts. And it's a difficult transition to go from one part of writing to another. If anyone knows that screenwriting and script writing is not exactly the same animal as writing novels and novellas and prose fiction. However, as difficult of a transition as it was, I felt like I was trying to lend my visual style and what I had to be aware of when trying to make movies and when trying to write movies to the writing craft. And it seems to have resounded. A lot of times the description details, I think, and the setting details, people tell me that tends to capture them. And I'd like to credit that to some of the time that I spent learning how to screenwrite. So I grew up doing that, but I came to prose pretty late on in life. To be honest, it really started in 2017, 2018. And that's when I started crafting my first novel. But it is a difficult transition. And one of the key things I found for anyone who's writing or anyone who's interested in getting involved with writing is Feedback is obviously important, but the right type of feedback from the right type of writers is important. So much of writing is about finding the niche and finding the genre. And I will tell you that we're getting into a world where genres are blending and fusing very much so. So it's not always easy to find a home. It's not always easy to find a demographic or a home or a specific audience to write to. Nevertheless, because I've had so many of these really amazing experiences, I feel like I can try to connect with the reader in different ways and through different. And no, that doesn't mean I'm selling them ice cream all the time or throwing exotic animal pictures at them. However, I'd like to say that it does bring a lot to what I'm trying to do here. And it's not easy to transition from one craft to another, even if it's a literary craft. But I'd like to believe I came a long way, and a lot of that is because of the feedback I've gotten. If you could extend, sir. So that's sort of this just generic slide here, showing you just a little bit of the difference between how you convey things in a script and how you convey things in prose. It is not as nearly poetic when you're writing screenplays. Everything has to be done in a visual and only visual kind of format. And you don't have as much room for flair. You can't talk about someone's internal monologue when you're writing a movie. That's what they do with narration. And a lot of people feel that narration sometimes steals away from the meat of the story and the dialogue of the story. So transitioning to that was hard. And to understand the freedoms that I have writing narrative fiction and prose was something that took me a while to adjust to. But I feel like ultimately, especially with help of people in my writing group and my writing peers, has built onto what I'm trying to do. People have described some of the things I've written as very cinematic, and I take that as a huge compliment. I know not every book necessarily has that sort of cinematic style, but it's something I like about what I've been learning to do with this. So transitioning was tough. It really was. It was a lot to learn, but I think I've found my stride with it, and I feel like these books represent that well. I can't express to you enough how important as a writer it is to not live in your own little bubble, to join writing groups, to get feedback from other authors of different genres and in different demographics. One of the things I'm going to mention a little later and a little bit more of an extent is the fact that I'm involved in a virtual writing group, and there's lots of different personalities of different types of authors in this group. And it can be difficult sometimes to negotiate these personalities, but they're so valuable in me understanding the plethora of people that might be reading what I'm trying to write. Writing groups, if you're ever interested in writing, if you're ever interested in developing literary craft, it's important. You're never always going to like everything everybody says. That's something you have to get used to when you're going out and doing any type of art in the public realm. But getting that feedback, knowing what to change and what not to change, when to stick with your guns and solidify something that you put on the page versus when to make the revisions and make the changes, it's a difficult thing. And it's an emotionally difficult thing too, because you put a lot of yourself into what you're writing. You put a lot of your emotion into it, even if you're not like the characters you're writing about. So sometimes when someone says, I think you should eliminate this whole scene here or revise this whole thing, you have an emotional attachment to not doing that. And then you think about, how can I factor this in or rework this in later? And there's some big decisions to make when you're talking about a narrative, because it is in a lot of ways your baby, and you want to treat it right. You want to stay true to the essence of why you started to write it this way to begin with. Greg, you would? Thank you. So talking about, one of the things I don't have experience, and I'm going to be honest with you guys up here, is I've never presented about artwork I've done or books that I've done. So I'm trying to straddle the line with giving away too much information for those who haven't read. So I'm probably going to keep some of the plot details to the minimum here, just for those of you that are interested in reading. But I do want to talk about what inspired it and what the themes are. And Controlling Your Interest was my first novel. It's one of those ones that I really had to adapt from that visual script-like format, because I had the whole idea of how to construct the plot and how everything wove together from the get-go. But executing that in prose fashion, in a narrative fashion, is a difficult thing to do. You're taking dialogue tags and you're realizing, well, how much of that should the character be saying versus how much of it should the character be divulging just to the audience internally. It was inspired in a lot of ways by what was going on at the time that I was writing it. And not in any one particular political direction or not, but at the time I started building the story for Controlling Interest, which is it's a crime thriller. It involves essentially two very, very different people involved in big business and how they handle the world in very different ways, one in a very radical, socially protesting way. But a lot of that was inspired by a lot of the social protests and populist movements I've been seeing around the United States during the time that I was writing it. We were at the tail end of a lot of the Occupy Wall Street movements. There definitely were other social movements that were picking up steam at the time. And I just felt like bringing those further into the realm of public awareness is important. But I want to do it in a creative way, and I wanted to do it in sort of a radical way. And it's better to do it radically through fiction than to do something radical in society, because it's just a narrative and no one really can get hurt from it. A lot of what drove this was I've always been interested and inspired by texts, by comic books, by movies, by all sorts of art and entertainment about this debate or dichotomy between people who look at some public figures, even extreme ones, as villains and vigilantes. So the main character in this book, I don't know if I want to tell you if he's a villain or a vigilante. I think, to be honest, that is for the reader to decide. And it was really tough because at times I identified with that character, and at times I was like, I would never do the things this man did. So definitely a fine line, but playing around with that line, and it's not something that hasn't been done before in fiction, whether it's movies, TV, or prose, but it is something I did want to sort of run with there. And I feel like it came across to the people who were reading it that this is something, that the complexity of anyone's moral character is way more developed and way more intricate than we think it is. And I want to say that prose is a great way to get that across. Because prose, you have all this time to do character development. You have all these choices you have to make. It's not something you're going to see reduced because of visual entertainment. You see that a lot on TV. I love television. I have a lot of great TV shows and movies I like, but you see that a lot. You see things being drawn out as long paced action scenes, and a lot of the depth is not present. And I think in the novel format, you have the ability to do that. Again, feedback from other authors, especially ones where I'm dealing with such big ideas like social protest, about wealth inequality, about disenfranchised groups and their rights, and people who claim to practice good moral behavior in this world, but don't preach that moral behavior and they don't act on that moral behavior. Especially with those big ideas, it's essential that you talk with different people and that you bounce these ideas off of people. And not just because of sensitivity for the reader, but just to make sure that you really are communicating what you want to communicate in these stories and in the narrative, right? So this is around the time where I started toying with the idea of joining a writing group. I hadn't quite joined one prior to writing Controlling Interest, but I did find a fellow writer that I've been able to bounce ideas for, and I have to thank him for that, because it's amazing how much he helped me develop my craft and how much he helped that transition from screenwriting and script writing to prose, because it's not as easy as it sounds. There's a little Easter egg, and you may be among the few people who know this, because I haven't put this out there on the internet, but one of the things I did in the novel is every character's last name, except for one character, is named after a street on Long Island, where I grew up. So, and the good ones and the bad ones, and it has no correlation to whether there was traffic on the road or not, I'm just saying. Yeah, so that's a little Easter egg. The only reason the one character who did not have a name after a street on Long Island was simply because I forgot, that's all. And trust me, there are plenty of names I could have changed it to, but I thought that was a little fun piece of information. I've spent some time in New York City. I worked at the Met for a while. A lot of the scenes in this book take place in New York City at events, things like the Thanksgiving Day Parade, the Rockefeller tree lighting, the big fanfare events of society, particularly in New York and Los Angeles, drove a lot of the action that's going on in this book. But definitely, I definitely feel like my time there, my time anywhere I go, whether it's for studying or doing research for a book, or just because I've had that experience in my life and I've traveled there for fun, I feel like it helps so much to get the setting details. People will say, many people have told me, write what you know, and that's so right. You need to write what you know. You need to put elements of yourself, even if not your entire self, into what you're writing. And going to these places, the sensory details, what's able to be captured from that, I feel like has helped so much of what I do. When I get to talking about foundations, I'll talk about the setting there, because it's not some place I've ever been to. But I feel like even the idea of how to translate your sensory experiences to the page is just very, very important. Speaking of which, my second novel, Foundations, I had already joined the group then, and I had bounced this whole thing off of the group. We meet virtually. I think it's like Facebook chat. We do it very regularly, twice a month, once we submit, once a week we submit, and once a week we have conferences where we both review and critique, as well as just cross-promote and bolster each other's work. And this was something I wrote in script format that I had to translate straight up the whole novel into a book. It was a monster task. It was a lot of work. It was even harder to do that when you already have something in script format, because there's so much you need to add and so much you need to get rid of formatting-wise when you translate this material. I did do archaeology for quite a while. I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. One of the things that got me is that in fiction, again, no matter what medium it's in, I feel like anthropology and archaeology is not always communicated as it really is in real life. I love Indiana Jones. I'm not going to lie, that's what got me involved in wanting to do archaeology, like many, many other people. However, there's, and many of the other types of archaeological mysteries out there, and archaeological books, Clive Cussler books, just movies you see out there on TV. But I just felt like something was missing from my experiences there. I have done excavations, and a lot of it had to do with the archaeology and anthropology culture. And, you know, adventure, people associate archaeology with adventure, and it is. There's a lot of adventure in it. It's just not the same type of adventure you're used to seeing.